Okay, so test number 4, the consistency test. Are the Gospels consistent in their representation or telling of the story of Jesus? Now, you have to remember there's 4 different people writing these Gospels. So if you take a group of 4 people and you tell them to retell something, or you ask them to retell something that they see, are they all going to have the exact same story? No, that's not the case. However, if you do have 4 different stories from 4 different people who are exactly the same, I saw this blue car traveling down the road at 50 miles an hour hit this other person, and all the details line up exactly the same. He was going 50 miles an hour, blue car, this shade, say like robin egg blue. There was a I don't know, there was a half-dead pine tree on the left side of the road. If everybody says that exactly the same way, doesn't that sound like it's fabricated? Like everybody met up beforehand and they all essentially spewed out the same story? Whereas compared to where you have 4 different people saying, well, yeah, he was driving at this speed, and it was blue, it was dark blue, because, I don't know, I don't, to me, something's blue. It's not dark blue, light blue, robin eggs blue. You know, yeah, there was trees on the side of the road or whatever, and you have 4 different stories, but of the same thing, and they don't all match up perfectly line for line for line. That's more believable to me. In a court case, for example, I'll give you a quote from a well-known law school scholar, Simon Greenleaf of Harvard Law School, one of history's most important legal figures and the author of an influential treatise on evidence. He said of the 4 Gospels, there is enough evidence, there is enough of a discrepancy to show that there could have been no previous concert among the disciples, and at the same time such substantial agreement as to show that they all were independent narrators of the same great transaction. I'll give you another quote. Historian and German scholar Hans Stier agrees that argument over basic data and divergence of details suggests credibility, because fabricated accounts tend to be fully consistent and harmonized. Every historian is especially skeptical at that moment when an extraordinary happening is only reported in accounts which are completely free of contradiction. So I try to mumble my way into saying exactly what he said in such eloquence. So don't take my word for it. He summed that up as greatly as I ever could. So test number 5, the bias test. This is essentially very similar to the character test that we talked about before. Do the gospel writers have any bias that would have colored their work? Do they have any vested interests in portraying the facts differently or altering them? I would agree no, and he does that in the book as well. But they didn't have anything to gain by claiming that Jesus was the Son of God, and it went against everything essentially that the Jewish leaders taught or wanted to talk about or portray. And so they didn't get any special treatment from anybody. They got persecuted, they got criticized, they got beaten up, they got thrown in prison, and then later they died martyrs for their beliefs and for proclaiming that Jesus Christ was the Son of God. So no, I don't think that they have any bias that could be used against them in that way. I think it actually shows their true character, their true intentions, shall we say. Okay, so test number 6, the cover-up test. When people testify about events they saw, they will often try to protect themselves or others by conveniently forgetting to mention details that are embarrassing or hard to explain. As a result, this raises the uncertainty about the veracity of their entire testimony. So do the gospel writers do that? No. You have, for example, John Mark, the author of the book of Mark, who writes about Peter, or writes presumably about from Peter's perspective. He writes about about Peter's denial of Jesus, for example, and if he was trying to write that away or trying to whisk that information away or cover that up, he would have done so, but he did not. He showed that Peter denied Christ 3 times. That's pretty embarrassing. Now, all of the Gospels they show Peter and all of his flaws, as well as the disciples. You have Peter who was very, I guess you could kind of characterize him as a vigilante, and he says, "Oh, I got this. I got, I'm going to do this right. I'm going to do that right. I'm never going to deny you, Jesus. I'll go to die for you." And he denies Jesus 3 times. Or where he initially walks on water, and then he loses faith, and then he falls into the drink, and Jesus has to save him. Or you have the episode of where John and James, the sons of Zebedee, disciples of Jesus, they essentially have their mom ask, or their mom asks for them, if they can sit at the left and right hand side of Jesus. And you just have all this embarrassing stuff that comes up that doesn't get whisked away or thrown under the carpet. So if you were trying to tell a real story, why would you hide that? Why would you say that if you were just trying to fabricate a lie? That doesn't make sense. These are the tiny little details that shed light to the whole entire situation. That, hey, this did really happen. This could have really happened. This did really happen. So I find that those slight, where they talk about those embarrassing things in the Gospels, I think that does show the truth in the whole situation. Those are little nuggets to prove the truthfulness of the testimony. Okay, so test number 7, the corroboration tests. When the Gospels mention people, places, and events, do they check out to be correct in cases in which they can be independently verified? Yes, they do. In fact, through archaeology in the last few years, the last 100 years actually, they found places that have been talked about in the Bible. Well, obviously in the Bible, but in the New Testament, for example, the book of John, there's an instance where Jesus heals a lame man at a portico in the pool of, I believe it's the pool of Shaloma. And for the longest time, everybody said, we haven't found that pool, and the book of John is suspect anyway, so that probably never happened. Well, they did find that pool. But just the way that John describes the pool, they initially didn't believe that, but yet through archaeology they did find that it was like he said it was. So that actually put him in that put the Gospel of John in a truthful light then, that he was telling the truth. So another way that the Gospels passed the corroboration test is Josephus. Josephus was a Roman Jewish historian who wrote about his experiences with the Romans, and he also wrote about Jewish history. He also writes about Jesus and Jesus's crucifixion on the cross. So I think that's also noteworthy, that he's not a believing Christian, yet he also writes about that. So test number 8, the adverse witness test. So this is when you have independent witnesses who also tell about the same happening or testify about the same happening that you're trying to investigate. They provide a different light. Maybe they provide a different, maybe they're in opposition to the other party that you just witnessed or just interviewed, for example, and they have a different outlook or take on things. However, despite all of that, they lend credence to the testimony of the other person that you just interviewed. For example, if you just interviewed the gospel writers, and then you come to the other side and you say, okay, let's interview the Jewish leaders or some Jewish scholars, whatnot. One of the sources that comes to mind as far as that is, I believe it's the Talmud, which is kind of like a commentary on the Old Testament, or Jewish teachings, documents, and so forth. It's also written that they talk about Jesus as a sorcerer who worked wonders and led Israel astray. So, like I said, they have a different take on things. They believe he has evil intentions and whatnot. However, with their statement that they just made, they do lend credence to the fact, when you're looking at things through the eyes of the Gospels, that Jesus did exist, that he did work wonders. They don't refute that. he did work wonders, and he did have a huge following, because when they say he led Israel astray. So they have opposing views, but they do lend credence to one another, that this actually did happen, that this did occur. So that wraps up everything for this episode. The 8 different tests that Lee Strobel talks about when evaluating a witness's testimony. I hope this was insightful for you. I hope it was information, good, interesting information for you. I hope that you learned something. You could take something from it. I'm just trying to show that through the book, The Case for Christ, that the idea of Jesus Christ as God, the Son of God, is a reasonable thing to believe. Is not just some fantasy. You're not just blindly walking around hoping that something is the case. There is actually archaeological evidence for it. There's documented, there's historical documents talking about that, whether it's the Gospels or outside sources apart from the Gospels. I'm just trying to show that it's reasonable, that you don't have to believe something just because you want to. You should believe something because there's actually compelling evidence for it. There's reason to it, and there's a purpose to it. And so I'm trying to show that as a Christian. And I hope this was insightful for you. All right. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.